Being a true Buddhist. Back in the time of the Buddha, becoming a Buddhist was a fairly simple affair. You heard a talk on the Dhamma, you were inspired, and you would say to the Buddha or to the person giving the talk that you were taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha of monks. At some point, the process became a little bit more formal. In the Khuddakapatha, which is a later text in the Suttas, the very first passage deals with taking refuge. It directs you to say it 3 times, not just once. It's that passage we have heard many times. Buddham saranam gacchami, Dharmam saranam gacchami, Sangham saranam gacchami, then dutiyampi, and tatiyampi. A second time, a third time. You repeat the phrases, but the question is, what does it mean to take refuge? Chapter 1. Being a true Buddhist. There's another passage in the canon that talks about the ideal lay follower. The ideal lay follower has 5 characteristics. One is that you're convinced of the Buddha's awakening, that he really did awaken to the truth, what he learned about karma, what he learned about rebirth, what he learned about the 4 noble truths. You take that as your guide. You take the Buddha's awakening as the event in world history by which you look at the rest of your life. You look at the rest of the world to get a sense of the possibilities within you and within the world. We live in a world where the Buddha was awakened, where there has been a Buddha who has left behind his teachings. You try that world on for size, and you decide that it fits. I remember when I was becoming a Buddhist, one of the main breakthroughs, or milestones, I guess you would say, was when I realized that I really had to depend on my own karma. Prior to that, I'd been raised a Christian, and even as I was beginning to have lots of doubts about those teachings, there was still a strong sense that there was somebody up there who was looking after us. Suddenly, I realized that if I wanted to be a true Buddhist, I'd have to drop that. That was a real milestone in my mind. It threw me back on my own actions. I really had to be more honest with myself. I really had to be more careful about what I did. That's what the passage in the canon mentions next. Once you've decided that you are convinced of the Buddha's awakening, then the very first thing is that you live a life of virtue. This is why nowadays, when they have formal ceremonies for people who want to declare themselves Buddhist, after you take the triple refuge, you take the 5 precepts, which means that you will not intentionally kill, steal, have illicit sex, take intoxicants, or lie. This sort of virtue is the second quality of becoming a Buddhist, and it makes you a genuine Buddhist. The third is that you do believe in the principle of karma. The Sutta expands on that in the 4th characteristic, which is that you don't look for protective charms. You don't look for magical formulae that will somehow undo your karma, which means that by the Theravada definition of a Buddhist, Vajrayanists are not Buddhist because they do believe in these charms and formula that will somehow undo your karma. There are even other types of Mahayanists who believe that there is an outside power out there that will come over and take over the ground of your being and erase your karma for you. By Theravada standards, those are not Buddhists. You decide that when you look for protection in this life, and this is what it means to take refuge, where you go to guarantee that you will not suffer, you have to go to your own actions. Finally, the 5th characteristic is that when you make merit, you look first for the monastic Sangha. The word Sangha has developed many meanings, especially in the past couple of decades. But at the time of the Buddha, it meant the Sangha of monks, and secondarily, the Sangha of nuns. When you make merit there first. Of course, that doesn't mean you're not generous to other people. The idea is simply that if you really want to give a gift that will have great benefit, the Sangha is where you look first. So that's what the texts say. Ajahn Lee adds that when you take refuge, it has many levels of meaning. The first level is to take refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha by taking them as examples. This is how you're going to look for happiness in your life. Then you look at their qualities and you try to develop both the qualities that made the Buddha and the qualities he had when he became a Buddha. That gives you 3 levels: the external level, then the internalizing level, and then finally the level where the refuge has been fully internalized. It's that final level where your refuge is secure. The Buddha himself, toward the end of his life, said to take yourself as your refuge, which is the same as taking the Dhamma as your refuge. Then he defined that as practicing the establishment of mindfulness, which is basically how you get the mind into concentration. That's when you really do become your own refuge on that second level, the level of practice, the level of internalizing. It's only when you find your first taste of the deathless that you really are safe. That would be the level of fully internalized teachings. When you practice concentration to develop your discernment, you realize that the concentration, even though it's a better pleasure, a more stable pleasure than you can gain from sights, sounds, smells, tastes, tactile sensations, or thinking about things, is still fabricated. And remember how good fabricated things can be. They can fall apart. You want something that's not fabricated, something that's not liable to falling apart. You investigate the various states of concentration and you realize that none of them qualify. It's when you realize that you're up against a dead end, that you can't stay in a state of concentration, but you don't want to go anywhere else because nowhere else is going to be any better, that the third alternative opens up. That third alternative is the deathless. It's outside of space and time. As the Buddha says, it's neither coming, nor going, nor staying in place. Another image in the canon comes from a passage where a deva is asking the Buddha how he crossed over the stream. The Buddha replied that he had crossed over the stream neither by moving forward nor by staying in place. The deva was perplexed, but the Buddha wasn't just being funny. We define space and time by either staying or moving. So, an alternative that's neither space nor time has to be neither staying nor moving. That's where the absolute refuge is. Absolute refuge. Chapter 2. The Path to Become a Buddhist. So there are many stages in the path to become a Buddhist. In terms of the world, we've gotten to the point nowadays where people who study Buddhism as an academic subject say that anybody who calls himself a Buddhist is a Buddhist for their purposes. But what are their purposes? They're basically doing sociology. For our purposes, the point when you become a Buddhist comes when you've made a change in your attitudes. You're really going to adopt the Buddha's point of view, the Buddha's analysis of how we suffer, why we suffer, and how we can stop. That puts you in a different world and makes you a different person. It gives you more capabilities than you would have had otherwise. There are so many teachings out there that say you can't do this on your own, that you have to depend on somebody else. The Buddha says, though, that you can do it on your own. You can do it with help, with guidance, but you have to do the actions yourself, and you are capable of doing this. That's the new you that comes when you really take on the Buddha's awakening as your guide. And of course, the world is a new world, a world that contains this possibility. The teachings are there, they're still alive, and the opportunity to practice is still there. The door is open, as the Buddha would say. Show your faith. You don't just say that you believe in these things, you actually act on these beliefs, observing the precepts, looking for your security in skillful actions. That's when you've made the important step in becoming a Buddhist. Chapter 3. Going for Refuge, the Triple Gem. The act of going for refuge marks the point where one commits oneself to taking the Dhamma, or the Buddha's teaching, as the primary guide to one's life. To understand why this commitment is called a refuge, it's helpful to look at the history of the custom. In pre-Buddhist India, going for refuge meant proclaiming one's allegiance to a patron, a powerful person or god, submitting to the patron's directives in hopes of receiving protection from danger in return. In the early years of the Buddha's teaching career, his new followers adopted this custom to express their allegiance to the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. But in the Buddhist context, this custom took on a new meaning. Buddhism is not a theistic religion. The Buddha is not a god. And so a person taking refuge in the Buddhist sense is not asking for the Buddha personally to intervene to provide protection. Still, one of the Buddha's central teachings is that human life is fraught with dangers, from greed, anger, and delusion, and so the concept of refuge is central to the path of practice, in that the practice is aimed at gaining release from those dangers. Because the mind is the source both of the dangers and of release, there is a need for two levels of refuge: external refugees, which provide models and guidelines so that we can identify which qualities in the mind lead to danger and which to release, and internal refugees, that is, the qualities leading to release that we develop in our own mind in imitation of our external models. The internal level is where true refuge is found. Although the tradition of going to refuge is an ancient practice, it is still relevant for our own practice today, for we are faced with the same internal dangers that face people in the Buddha's time. We still need the same protection as they. When a Buddhist takes refuge, it is essentially an act of taking refuge in the doctrine of karma. It's an act of submission in that one is committed to living in line with the principle that actions based on skillful intentions lead to happiness, while actions based on unskillful intentions lead to suffering. It's an act of claiming protection in that, by following the teaching, one hopes to avoid the misfortunes that bad karma engenders. To take refuge in this way ultimately means to take refuge in the quality of our own intentions, for that's where the essence of karma lies. The refugees in Buddhism, both on the internal and on the external levels, are the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, also known as the triple gem. They are called gems, both because they are valuable and because, in ancient times, gems were believed to have protective powers. The triple gem outdoes other gems in this respect because its protective powers can be put to the test and can lead further than those of any physical gem, all the way to absolute freedom from the uncertainties of the realm of aging, illness, and death. The Buddha, on the external level, refers to Siddhartha Gautama, the Indian prince who renounced his royal titles and went into the forest, meditating until he ultimately gained awakening. To take refuge in the Buddha means not taking refuge in him as a person, but taking refuge in the fact of his awakening, placing trust in the belief that he did awaken to the truth, that he did so by developing qualities that we too can develop, and that the truths to which he awoke provide the best perspective for the conduct of our life. The Dhamma, on the external level, refers to the path of practice the Buddha taught to his followers. This, in turn, is divided into three levels: the words of his teachings, the act of putting those teachings into practice, and the attainment of awakening as the result of that practice. This three-way division of the word Dhamma acts as a map showing how to take the external refugees and make them internal, learning about the teachings, using them to develop the qualities that the Buddha himself used to attain awakening, and then realizing the same release from danger that he found in the quality of deathlessness that we can touch within. The word Sangha, on the external level, has two senses, conventional and ideal, In its ideal sense, the Sangha consists of all people, lay or ordained, who have practiced the Dhamma to the point of gaining at least a glimpse of the deathless. In a conventional sense, Sangha denotes the communities of ordained monks and nuns. The two meanings overlap, but are not necessarily identical. Some members of the ideal Sangha are not ordained. Some monks and nuns have yet to touch the deathless. All those who take refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha become members of the Buddha's fourfold assembly, parisa, of followers: monks, nuns, male lay devotees, and female lay devotees. Although there's a widespread belief that all Buddhist followers are members of the Sangha, this is not the case. Only those who are ordained are members of the conventional Sangha. Only those who have glimpsed the deathless are members of the ideal Sangha. Nevertheless, any followers who don't belong to the Sangha in either sense of the word still count as genuine Buddhists in that they are members of the Buddha's parisa. When taking refuge in the external Sangha, one takes refuge in both senses of the Sangha, but the two senses provide different levels of refuge. The conventional Sangha has helped keep the teaching alive for more than 2,500 years. Without them, we would never have learned what the Buddha taught. However, not all members of the conventional Sangha are reliable models of behavior. So when looking for guidance in the conduct of our lives, we must look to the living and recorded examples provided by the ideal Sangha. Without their example, we would not know, 1, that awakening is available to all and not just to the Buddha, and 2, how awakening expresses itself in real life. Chapter 4. Conclusion. On the internal level, the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha are the skillful qualities we develop in our own minds in imitation of our external models. For instance, the Buddha was a person of wisdom, purity, and compassion. When we develop wisdom, purity, and compassion in our own minds, they form our refuge on an internal level. The Buddha tasted awakening by developing conviction, persistence, mindfulness, concentration, and discernment. When we develop these same qualities to the point of attaining awakening too, that awakening is our ultimate refuge. This is the point where the three aspects of the triple gem become one, beyond the reach of greed, anger, and delusion, and thus totally secure. This is also the point where we become members of the ideal Sangha, providing an example for anyone else who wants to find the same security inside.